I will welcome you once more with this mic. Welcome everybody to the last public meeting of the local summit for this season. We're having a very important topic, your taxes and where your money goes. So I do not want to waste any more time, but turn the program over to today's chair, Lorraine Walsh.
Thank you, Elaine. A little bit of business before we start. First of all, unfortunately, due to unforeseen personal circumstances, the administrator of Larchmont is not able to attend this morning, and it was too late to find someone else at the village whose schedule would allow them to join us. I did put together a packet that has a lot of the information that would have been presented here today by the village administrator. For those of you who are here interested in the Larchmont, you can come pick that up at the end. There should be enough for everybody. I have 25 copies. And then we also have we have a handout from the town of Mamaroneck with some pie charts, which, help. We love pie charts. Help you visualize. That's up here, and also one from the village of Mamaroneck. So all of this you can come up and avail yourself of at the end of the program. Okay, so, and then we're gonna have a Q&A at the end. We have this new microphone set up here. So one of these is to project to the room, and the other is connected to LMC. That means that we only have one set. We're going to pass it to whoever needs to speak. We're not going to, at the end when we do the Q&A, I'm not going to walk around and give it to you and have you read, say your own question. You're going to stand up, introduce yourself, ask your question, and here's my personal request. Be as succinct and brief with your question as possible, because I then have to repeat it back to the room and to LMC. And my memory isn't as good as it used to be, I'm going to admit. Okay, so, and then that's it. Now we're ready to introduce. So I have with us today, we have Administrator Meredith Robson from the town of Mamaroneck. Yay! And Meredith has served as the town administrator for Mamaroneck for approximately 3.5 years. And she served in a variety of governmental management positions for a total of nearly 38 years, which I don't believe that is. You must have been a baby. So, and she earned a Master of Public Administration from John Jay College of Criminal Justice and has been very active in professional associations throughout her career, including serving on the New York State Conference of Mayors Executive Committee, the Westchester County Municipal Officials Association Executive Committee, and as a member of Pace University's MPA Advisory Board. Next to Meredith, we have the new manager of the village of Mamaroneck, Kathleen Gill. Yay! Kathleen was appointed by the Board of Trustees at their annual reorg meeting on December 2nd, 2024, so she's really brand new to the village of Mamaroneck. But she comes with wide-ranging background in municipal government administration. She previously worked in the city of New Rochelle, serving first as the Chief of Staff / Corporation Counsel, and then as city manager, where she oversaw 750 plus full-time employees and an annual operating budget of $265 million. That's a lot of money. Ms. Gill holds a bachelor's degree from Skidmore, a master's in urban planning and environmental studies from Pace, and a Juris Doctorate from the Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. And she has also 3 children and resides in New Rochelle, New York. Where does she find the time? So we're going to start. So today's conversation is about your local taxes. Where does the money go? And I've kind of laid this out to start with the most basics and work our way through the variety of types of budgets that the villages and towns have. And then at the end, we'll get into a little bit about budgeting and fiscal policy, and then we'll open it up to questions. I'm going to sit now. So we're going to start with the basics. Residents in this community pay a lot of property tax. And so I think the first question most people have is how much of that total goes to our local government services, and where does the rest go?
So once you get these charts, you'll see the detail. And if I were our town controller, I would have the numbers memorized, but I don't, so I'm going to give you just go over them with you quickly. So for the town budget, the largest, which will be no surprise to anyone, the largest piece of the tax dollar goes to the school district at 59%. The general town budget is 3%. Ambulance district, it's very small, so it's showing as 0%, but it's not. Part town is 10%. Highway is 6%, if I'm reading these correctly. Special districts is 7%, and I'll talk a little bit more about the special districts later. County portion of the tax bill, 11%. County refuse, 1%, and the sewer district is 3%. So you can see that by far the largest percentage is on the school side. And then we have a number of funds, which I know that we'll talk about in a little bit, and then also on the county side.
Thank you. So we have, similarly, you'll see that the local taxes are a much smaller percentage of the overall tax bill. The village tax is about 25%, and the public library is 2.8%. Westchester County is 14.23%. And this doesn't seem like it's working. I don't think this is working. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. And then, so I'll go back. Village of Mamaroneck is 25% of the overall tax bill. The public library is 2.8%. Westchester County is 14.23%. And the school district, which is the largest portion, as it is in most communities, at 55.4%.
Someday we're going to have microphones that we don't have to pass back and forth like this. Yeah, you got to talk right into this little silver one. Okay, so we're going to start with the operating budget. The village and town have several budgets, the main one being the operating budget, which provides funding for most of the programs and services provided by the municipality. What is the size of the villages? I'm going to start with the village's operating budget, and what services is the village responsible for providing? And can you talk a little bit about how the costs break down by department and service provided?
Yes. So our total budget that was just adopted is a little over $49 million. The breakdown, more than half is allocated toward our human resources, so our employees and employee benefits. That is, the specific breakdown is 15.8 million for general employees and 11.8 for our public safety employees. That would be police and fire. And so again, more than half of our budget is for our human resources. The rest, we have 11% is for debt service, which is $5.5 million. General government support is $7.3 million. That's basically contract services. For example, we hire consultants to support our staff. 1% is for our health costs, and 4% is transportation. Then we have culture and recreation, which is 7%, $3.5 million. That would be our parks and recreational resources. And then home and community services is 3.1%.
I'll just do a quick follow-up and then we'll switch to the town. But providing services requires people. So I think people would like to know, how many employees does the village have in total? And within each department for police, paid fire, DPW, et cetera? And how much of the operating budget, the total operating budget, is spent on salaries and benefits of local government employees as a percentage of the budget?
So we have a total of 162 positions. We have several vacancies right now. So we have just over 152 people that are working for the village right now. The majority are in the public safety. We have 52 in the police department. So that is really, a third of our workforce. What was the other question?
But what is the, for the operating budget, what is the total percent that is just for personnel, salaries, benefits, et cetera?
So it is 56% is for our workforce. So again, when you're managing an operating budget and looking to reduce costs, that is really, unfortunately, where you have to look to make those hard decisions.
Hopefully you remembered all the questions I just asked Kathleen.
I'm going to do my best. So on the town side, we're set up a little bit differently with a bunch of different funds. Hopefully this time everybody can hear me. So I'll run through those quickly and give you some sense of that. So for town services, for the unincorporated town residents, the part-town budget is $19.1 million. For all residents, including the villages, it's almost 15.5. And then we have a number of special funds. So we have a highway fund, which is 7.3 almost. Fire is 5.4. Street lighting, who would have known that we had a separate fund just for street lighting? But we do, 331,000. Ambulance, 2.2 almost, 2.2 million. Garbage, 2.8. Sewer, 773,000, and water at almost 2.3. So we're set up a little bit differently than village budgets and also city budgets, where we have all these funds that are individual. They act separately from each other, and there are some restrictions in terms of how we use them. In terms of the functions that we have, I'll go through the same as Kathleen did in terms of the breakdown. So for general government, out of a $55.7 million total budget, we spend about $8.3 million. For public safety, $9.5 million. Transportation, $231,000. Health, $2.4 million. Home and community services, 3.9, almost 4 million. Land use, 521,000. Employee benefits, 13.9, almost 14 million, and that's about 25% of the budget. Debt service is 4.2, almost 4.3 million at 8%. Culture and recreation, almost 5.6 million at 10% of our budget. Public works, 6.6 million at 12%. And for total employees, we have about 128 total, regular full-time positions, and then we have approximately another 350 to 400 part-time positions for our seasonal work, our recreation in particular. As far as number of staff goes, we have 38 police officers, 15 firefighters, 34 highway, 12 recreation, and 28 administrative staff. That wasn't what I didn't do that.
Hello. Okay. Great. Thank you. So the next budget that is probably it is definitely most important after the operating budget would be the capital budget, which goes towards all of those big projects that we love to see and that need to happen in the towns and villages in our local government. I'm going to start with the village again, but I'm going to read the entire question and the follow-up so that we can move a little more smoothly here. What is the size of the capital budget for the village and town? How is it funded? And generally speaking, what is its purpose? Is there a multi-year plan for capital fund work? And the follow-up is, I know many residents are interested in understanding how decisions are made to initiate a capital project. So if you could use a recent example that most residents would be familiar with, something substantial such as a bridge replacement, or park renovation, sorry. It's your choice. Or park renovation, can you explain how a capital, how, I don't know. How? Hello? Yeah, I hit the button. Okay. Watch that button. Can you explain how a capital project's costs are projected from the outset and throughout as the project moves along and costs may change? What is the decision-making process for going ahead with the project? What, if any, involvement of the community is there? What role does outside funding, such as public-private partnerships, grants, et cetera, play? And how is project management handled? I do. I'll if you forget something.
Okay, so I'll start with the capital budget. Our current capital budget is $48 million for the 24-25 budget year. That is essentially the same size as the operating budget. So I would say that's a little on the heavy side. It predated me. So just for example, a budget like that hit the next year's operating budget in just the debt service in the amount of $960,000. So moving forward, the board is currently considering a 5-year capital budget program. If you're doing your capital budget year to year, you're not really evaluating looking at future projects that you need to do and looking at your bonding capacity, how much you want to bond in any given year, how that's going to hit the next year's operating budget. So that long-term planning is very important, and we are right in the process of that, of looking at considering that 5-year capital program. Let me see if the next question. So a recent example. I'm not going to talk about any bridges. I'm going to talk about flooding. We have, as most communities have struggled with flooding events, Mamaroneck has as well, and this is a. The best way to do this is it's really based upon the engineering. So you have to start with a study. And you really are, for many capital projects, you're studying it first before you actually go into design. And that's especially true for flooding. If you're focusing on a neighborhood and you see that they have flooding concerns, you would study it. You're not just looking at that area, you're looking at where the water is coming from, where it's going. When you do that analysis, you will come up with a series of projects that would potentially alleviate the flooding. You're never really talking about resolving flooding, you're talking about mitigating it. And then you have to start downstream. If you start upstream, you're creating problems downstream. So as far as the community is concerned, you generally have people say, we're flooding, where's the project? Do the project in our neighborhood and stop the flooding. But you really have to do that engineering analysis. You have to determine where to start, which projects to go first, and feed those projects into a capital plan. And that isn't always very satisfying. You may have people that are upstream and struggling with flooding, but you really have to start downstream. And these projects they can take years to accomplish. Just to talk a little bit about that process, once you have the study completed and you've identified a series of projects, you start to design the first projects that you want to complete. And then when you have the design, you create the bid specifications. All of these projects are sent out for public bids, sealed bids. So you have the design specifications prepared and you submit it for bid and you receive sealed bids, and the municipality is required to take the lowest responsible bidder. So you could have the lowest bid, which is a contractor that has never done a flood mitigation project, and they wouldn't be a responsible bidder. So then you could go to the next highest bidder. And when you choose the contractor, then you either have someone on staff. In a small community, you wouldn't have someone on staff that can project manage and really be the manager from the municipal perspective. So you would a village would generally hire a construction manager that would oversee that project from beginning to end to make sure that it is being completed in accordance with the specifications. So that's generally the process. And did I forget any of funding? Okay, yes, that little thing. So basically, you're talking about bonding or grant opportunities with these major projects. You wouldn't really pay much in terms of, you wouldn't take much from the fund reserves to pay for flood mitigation projects. These projects are millions of dollars. So really leveraging grant opportunities is important. It's really important to do the design first, and then you have a better chance of obtaining grant funding. The agencies really want to see that the projects are what they call shovel ready. So they're designed, they're ready to go, and then you have a better chance of getting grants. And if you don't have the grants and you really want to move forward with a project, you can bond it. And generally, we have municipalities can get low interest bonds. But you, as I was talking about before, a bond that the $48 million, which that hit the next year's budget in almost $1 million. So you have to be careful. And if you over bond, you also can affect your credit rating. So then when you do bond, your interest rates are higher. So you really have to be careful and do that somewhat conservatively. Did I forget anything?
You got it all.
So some of what I'll say is ditto to what Kathleen said, but I'll try and add a little bit more from the town's perspective. I will give you some basic numbers right now. Excuse me. We do have a 5-year capital plan in the town. The total of that 5-year capital plan is $37.6 million. And we review that every year and add the next year on, but we also review all of the costs that are even in the 5-year plan that we are currently working on. For the town, for 2025, that capital budget is $8.6 million. We fund that with $0.9 million, so $900,000 of fund balance, $1.2 million of operating funds, $0.4, so $400,000 of grant funding, and $6.1 million of bonding. So as Kathleen mentioned, there's a variety of funding sources that we use all the time to try and get these projects accomplished. I will say one thing on grants. We are all seeking them, dying for them, working for them. But it does pose yet a second set of circumstances when you're managing the projects, right? So you're managing the capital project, the millions and millions of dollars of a capital project, and then you're also on a separate plane, sometimes also managing the grant process. So they're not free money. They're not easy to work with in many cases, depending on what the funding source is. This day and age, if you are looking at federal money, it's a little concerning. So we have to put all of those things together when we're trying to figure out how best to fund these projects and how to move forward so that we're not partway through and lose funding perhaps, or that we don't actually have enough. So constantly, and my board will certainly attest to this, they're seeing budget amendments when needed for projects that we thought we had enough money, and then we find out that we didn't. And one thing to keep in mind too, in terms of timing of these capital project estimates. So the town starts their budget process really this summer. So our department heads have already been asked to start collecting estimates for their capital projects, putting them together, figuring out what their needs are. By the time we actually go through the process, and I'll speak to that in a little bit, it could be maybe 2 years between, or more, between the time that we're getting initial estimates together, when we think we have a good number, and then when we actually go to do the project. So you can imagine, particularly in this climate, or the climate ever since COVID and beyond, it makes it a little challenging to actually have a real good number that you can count on. So it does pose some issues, but we try and keep up with that regularly with budget amendments. So some of our major projects, and I just picked a few because there's plenty, is our Baldwin Avenue pump station design. As Kathleen said, you need to design something before you can go ahead and just do it. So that's what we're working on, is the design of that. That's $200,000. Storm drainage design development, $479,000. My example is going to be a storm drainage project, but I'll add a little bit on recreation, because stormwater management is obviously one of the big things that we're all dealing with. So it's fresh in our minds. Gardens Lake dredging, for those of you that know the Gardens Lake area, $865,000 just to dredge. Road resurfacing and curb sidewalk replacements, $390,000. We have scaled that back considerably in 2025 so that we could fit in some of the other projects. So from how much do we spend on different types of capital projects? We spend about, this is just for 2025, sanitary sewer, $200,000. Information technology, $170,000. Storm drainage improvements, $1.3 million. Roadway and highway improvements, 1.5, almost 1.6. Water, and I'm sure I don't have to talk to all of you about your water bills, but that's a very significant issue that we're all dealing with. 1.1 million. Other projects, 307,000. Bond costs, so we have to pay the bond counsel in order to prepare all our bond resolutions. That doesn't come free. That's in excess of 300,000. 100,000. Vehicles and equipment, 1.7 million almost. Town building improvements, a little over $1 million. Recreation facilities, over $1 million. So you can see that all of these different categories we deal with every year, and those numbers change depending on what the focused project or projects are in any given year. Let's see. In terms of process, we go through a very similar process as the village and probably most municipalities, at least the ones I'm familiar with. It starts with staff putting together estimates and requests for their projects. And then in our case, it'll be myself and our town controller sitting down with all the department heads to work through all of their projects and see, do we need to do this? Can we put something off? Can we do something a little bit differently? But ultimately, once we get some information together, it goes to the town board, and the town board is the ultimate decision maker in terms of all the capital projects that we do. And there's lots and lots of discussion, as you can well imagine. And again, as we're going through the process, we're making amendments to the current projects and also dealing with the new projects. So at any given point in time, you're not just dealing with that year's capital projects, you're dealing with that year's capital projects plus all the years before that, and you're looking ahead. So we probably have, again, if I was a town controller, I'd have this memorized, but probably about 100 projects in various stages from when we started them to where we're at now. So it is a major task to keep up with all of those. We do that from our town engineer plays a very large role in that when we are talking about all the construction projects. Town controller obviously is knee deep in that. And then I'm working with the two of them to try and make sure that we're moving them all forward. So it is a major issue. I will say that in large measure, our stormwater management project, our study that we did with H2M, some of you may be familiar with that, we're now prioritizing those recommendations that they made and trying to, again, either find money to get them done or prioritize, through our regular annual budgets. So it's a very similar process that Kathleen mentioned. The one difference I'll mention in terms of a capital project that we did this year is for our pool, our outside pool over at Homix. We decided after much, that pool project has been in discussion before I got here 4 years ago. So it just takes a while. But this year we decided to go ahead and do a public survey. Hopefully some of you have participated in that, where we were anxious to find out what the public thought about those services and what they needed. So that was a little bit a different nuance that I imagine we'll do for some other projects depending on the extent of them. Did I hit all the?
You hit all
Okay.
and more. Thank you very much. I'm going to skip one of our questions, just so that we get to a couple of other things before we have to switch to Q&A. So I think given all the money that gets spent to keep our communities vibrant and functioning, everybody might be interested to hear, that reducing operating costs, increasing non-tax revenue sources, and expanding the tax base are really ways to help, the only ways, I think, to help lower property taxes or conversely increase the level of services. So what initiatives have you taken in these areas? And in what ways do our local municipalities and the county and the state cooperate, perhaps to share services or bundle contracts to save taxpayer money?
So as far as shared services, go, everyone, I think, on the municipal level, including the county, we're always looking to share whatever we possibly can. Kathleen, as you know, just came on board. She and I have already had some conversations about different services we might look to share. We also have some agreements already for leaf and snow removal with New Rochelle. We've worked with the village on brine for the winter and on some other things like our sewer camera truck that we share. So there are local services and projects that we try and share whenever that makes sense. So we take a look at that all the time. The county had a major initiative a number of years ago that we all got together and tried to see what types of services were best shared. So that happens as well, in addition to the individual circumstances. And then on the town side, we already have some things set up, like, for instance, our ambulance district, where we're working with both villages to provide that service. So we're looking at all those things. One thing new that the town has done is we just started a budget committee. So we're working through the budget committee to try and hopefully come up with some new ideas to save some taxpayer dollars.
Just to follow up a little on that, I think that especially when you're looking at a small community, shared services are really important. Even looking at opportunities to share employees. So maybe you have a village that doesn't need a full individual, let's say a planner, but needs someone to do planning services, and it's costly to have an outside planning consultant. So working with, and I have been working with some other villages to possibly share employees as well, and certainly services, and Meredith and I have been talking about different opportunities as well. I think that it's important also to, yes, you want to reduce costs and manage costs, but you also want to try and find ways to increase revenue and maybe even create new revenue sources. And the primary revenue source obviously is taxes and then fees. So I think that creating a new revenue source is important. One of the things that we're looking to do in the village is we just issued 2 RFPs at Harbor Island to try and bring in a restaurant and also seasonal food opportunities. So it's a great amenity for our residents, but also could be a significant revenue source going forward into the future.
Thank you. You guys both mentioned the effects of municipal debt on your operating budgets, paying off municipal debt. So I'm going to jump ahead then and ask you, the sort of flip side of that is emergencies come, and sometimes there's costs that you don't anticipate. And you also have to worry about your bond rating in terms of, how municipal debt actually hits you. So reserve funds are really important. Can you talk about how you maintain reserve funds? Do you have a policy regarding reserve funds? And also, are funds invested? And if they are, excuse me, what is the average rate of return and what safeguards or policies are there regarding investments?
She gives me the fund balance question. I feel very strongly about the need for fund balance to protect the community in terms of the emergencies, but there are also some operational needs to have a healthy fund balance, and I'll leave that to everybody else to determine what they feel a healthy fund balance is. But our policy calls for 15 to 25% of expenditures to be our target. We monitor that all the time. Our town controller does a great job keeping track of that. But it is important that we have funds, on the town side, because we make both the school and the county whole before we get the taxes in April. We need to make sure that we have those first few months of the year available in terms of cash for cash flow so that we can pay our bills until the tax money comes in. So that's a little bit different nuance than other communities. We do have emergencies. We also have, as you heard from both of us, tons and tons of capital projects. So trying to put some of that fund balance money when we have more than our policy calls for, trying to put that towards one-time uses so that we're not utilizing that every year to cover operating expenses. So there are the fund balance, the health of the fund balance, I think, is critical. You mentioned our rating, our bond rating. We happily have a AAA, hoping to keep a AAA, working very hard to keep a AAA. But sometimes the rating agencies change their perspective and their requirements. So it's always a balancing act, for sure, on how you best use those fund balance monies. But it is critical, I think, to the health of any community.
So the village has a fund balance policy that requires 30% of the operating budget in the unassigned fund balance, fund reserves. Our total is 18.3 and the unassigned is 14.9. 30% is I would say higher than most communities, but obviously healthy and helpful. This year we had a challenging budget and we did transfer $899,000 from the fund reserves to help mitigate the tax increase. It's obviously not a good practice to do every year, but again, in a difficult year, if you really do want to manage the tax increase, it's something that you can do when you have a healthy fund balance, which we do. And I think that when we're talking about the flood mitigation projects and grant opportunities, what happens often when you receive a grant, you don't receive the money up front. And so you won't receive the full grant monies until after the project is completed. And when you're talking about FEMA or federal monies, generally that money comes in the subsequent budget year. So what you're doing is you're borrowing from your fund reserves in order to pay for the project, knowing that in a subsequent year, and sometimes with FEMA, sometimes it's 2 or 3 years later where you get paid back. So if you don't have a healthy fund balance, you're really going to not be able to even accept many grants because you won't be able to have the funds to front the money and waiting for those grant monies to come in.
So super quick, I don't think either of you mentioned, hello? No. I don't think either of you mentioned whether or not you invest funds. So if you just answer that one quick, and then we're going to actually move to the Q&A.
We do invest, not in Bitcoin, but we have a great deal of restrictions in terms of the types of investment vehicles we're allowed to use. For the town, we invest and get about 4.2, 4.3%. Our two main investment vehicles are NICLAS and NILAF, which are acronyms for just really the investment vehicles out there, and they're going to merge soon, so we'll have one, but it's about 4.2, 4.3%.
Is that net?
What's that?
Is that net?
Net? Yes.
So we do invest, I think most communities do. If I had my treasurer here, I'd have more details on that. Maybe Nora has some information, but we do invest, but.
Great, thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left in the program, so I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So go ahead, stand up, please, if you could, just so everybody sees you.
Good morning. Great discussion. You've alluded to the climate, right, is what, right? So how vulnerable are you to cutbacks, particularly when you talk about the lag on grants? So talk about what you want percentage of capital budget or operating budget, whatever.
Great, thank you for that question, because that was number 10, which I cut off my list because I wanted to get to your questions. So, there you go. Oh, the question, sorry, forgot about the process with the microphone. So I'm going to use my question, paraphrase anyway. Given the current political and economic uncertainties, do you anticipate a loss of state or federal funding? What projects might be affected, and have you made contingency plans, especially considering that sometimes you get a grant from the state or the federal government, your project doesn't happen for quite some time, you don't get reimbursed until the project's finished. How do you handle that if that's, there's going to be some uncertainty?
You can answer that one.
Okay. I actually have a specific example that just happened last night during our board meeting. So we have a flood mitigation project, which is we are relying. It's a $2.5 million project, and it's 1.5 in a FEMA grant. And the discussion around the board last night was, do we know that this money is going to come in? And I think the short answer is no. So then the decision for the board is, do we want to spend? The reason why this project, and you talk about priorities, a lot of times projects are prioritized because there was a grant that came in. So do we want to prioritize this project? Would we prioritize this project if it weren't for the grant? And that's sort of something that that the board is struggling with, because there are grants that are being rescinded. And sometimes they're rescinded at the very last minute after a bid is awarded. And so that is something that we are very concerned about. George has something to say.
This is kind of a necessary moment for me to add to this. I have two hats. Up until January, I was county executive. We saw the same thing that Kathleen has just talked about. The county had made a commitment of $17 million on that project. And we have put it in the budget, they have put it in the budget, and it's available to be drawn down along with the state's $27 million. Now, the problem is the federal situation on two levels. On one level, the project has become more expensive than the last authorized $88 million. When my predecessor, big announcement, it's all there. Well, it's not all there. And now we also deal with the president. I will tell you what you don't already read in the newspaper, who has changed the game as to what can be stopped and what he tries to pause, and we take him to court, blah, 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 blah. So that project, at best now, we're going to try and work with Senator Schumer on this to move forward with the $88 million and do as much of the project with $88 million of federal dollars plus the state and county's committed money, and see how far that gets us. It won't get us everything, but at least something can happen, because this flood happened in '07. And, I have 2 grandchildren since then. If I can just add one other thing, because the question is more generic. This is one example of it. The federal budget, which we're going to be arguing about when I get to Washington, it has the capacity not only to hit a town or a village on a specific area where the federal government is involved, but the roll downhill effect. If the feds cut state money in general, the state is going to be destabilized. They just put a budget together, and it's predicated on revenues that they predict, which includes federal reimbursements. If that changes, then the state budget is destabilized. And then the other budgets are affected by that. I put a county budget together, $2.5 billion budget, perfectly balanced. no tax increase, and it had certain commitments in it, commitments to the town for money for affordable housing and for flood remediation studies. That could become destabilized if the state becomes destabilized. So in fairness, the towns and the villages, and probably the county too, are going to be the most affected that with no control over it. So follow what's happening in Washington if you want to know what's going to wind up sitting as a major headache in Village Hall, Town Hall, and the county. Sorry to give you that.
Just real quick, since nobody has a crystal ball, I'm echoing all that, but I just want to make one point, and that is that not only is it the money that we're expecting or hoping to receive, it's also the way now that we are preparing our grant applications because of the language that we need to be mindful of when we put an application in. So not just funding, but also asking for the funds.
Good, very good point. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Michael. Oh, sorry.
I just have two very simple questions. One, when we put in a contract, do you require the contractor to put up a surety bond?
Is there a surety bond when you contract for work? Yes and yes. I know the answer is yes.
The other one is a little more specific. I have a lot of grandchildren, and they run around on the streets. But when you're looking at all the potholes in the streets, you might just veer over. I think it's a safety issue. When are you going to fix all the myriad potholes, all these streets? I've been here for over half a century. In the last 2 years, the worst potholes. It's like driving in the science and can you tell me what is the amount of budget for this, and are they going to be fixed?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry. There's a lot of potholes in the road. When are they going to be fixed?
So we have annual money to do that work. We do it as best we can, stay on top of it as best we can. But, you know, it is a function of weather. So we take care of it as best we can.
But one quick thing is that I call up and had potholes fixed in our street. And I did call up and I said, Con Ed is fixing the street. Well, they tore it up. And there's a pothole 10 feet away. Would you ask them to fix it? And they said they can't. I asked them to fix it, and they did. I told the town, and I was chastised for that. But I think you should have a person, everyone here should be looking at the potholes, and put a call through to someone and say, hey, there's a pothole at the corner of X and Y. Please fix it. I mean, it should be fixed within a week. I can do it myself.
So often there are potholes that are nearby work that's being done either by the town or Con Edison. And the request to the town for Con Ed to fix a pothole is that they can't, because there usually is a contract between Con Ed and the town or the village to repair the road that they have disturbed for their work. And it goes no further than that. There, I just answered part of the question for you. So the suggestion that there could be somebody, number to call and to a pothole hotline, and would that even work? I mean, is that something that you could consider? We're going to move over to Meredith.
So I guess the someone would probably be to me, but calling in doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be fixed that afternoon, because then it's the resources. So we don't necessarily have staff that can just go out and fix a pothole. It's really that for us, it's mostly contracted services. We will go out, and if it's something where it needs to be blocked off for a safety reason, we can do that. We may be able to do a temporary fix, but for generally, we're really talking about hiring a contractor to do that. And maintaining the roads, it's going back to what George was saying, that's state monies. We receive state monies that help us to repave the roads. And of course, you have to prioritize the roads that are in the worst shape. There are a lot of roads that are in bad shape, but you have to sort of start from the ones that are in the worst shape. I will say in my prior community, we had district council people, and we would not show them the list of prioritized streets until we published it, because it was just too much of It was too much of, well, we want, the streets in our district. It was too much of a political issue. But you really just have to evaluate the streets and determine which ones have to be fixed, repaved first.
Who does that?
So we are, okay. We do that. We evaluate that internally, or you can hire a consultant to do that.
So we're going to move on. I know Michael Gottfried had a question, and then we'll probably have time for maybe one more question after that.
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone. This is very interesting topic. I'm the manager of my car. We talked about particular budgets. There are also overlapping cost budgets, for example. And my question goes to that, so let me stick to that. This involves the town recreation costs, which we alluded to in terms of cost of individuals. From 2022 to 2025, recreation costs have grown by $729,000, while fee income has grown by $140,000. Over that time, the deficit has almost tripled to $887,000, which is paid for 44% by the unincorporated taxpayers, 56% by the Village of Mamaroneck and the Village of Larchmont taxpayers. Village taxpayers also have their own recreation budgets to fund without contribution from unincorporated area taxpayers. And like recreation, village taxpayers pay for 56 their own engineer and attorney benefits, and 56% of the town budget, which has grown at a rate of 9% per year over the last few years. The taxes have increased on village. The town taxes have increased 15% this past year. And you prepared the town board for 10% tax levy increases for 26 and 2027. My question is, how are these increases good for and fair to the Village of Mamaroneck and Village of Larchmont?
So, thank you. I'm going to paraphrase. The town has two budgets, as Meredith discussed, two sections of their budget, which is part town and whole town. And Village of Larchmont and Village of Mamaroneck residents pay a portion of taxes to the town for certain services. And his question is regarding recreation costs. They have grown a lot, while income has grown by much less, and that the Larchmont Village and Mamaroneck Village taxpayers are paying 56% of the deficit between income and costs. And also that the village portion of town taxes has raised this year by 15%, and is anticipated to go up by 10% for the next 2 years. And how are all those increases fair to village residents?
So I think we need a lot more time than we have to answer that question, and certainly we'd be happy to sit down with Michael as we have at any point, and anybody else who's interested. But I will tell you that every single year during budget conversations, both on the staff level and with the town board, we try and make the best decisions and the most fair decisions we can in terms of the services that we're providing to both villages. So I can't speak to the particular numbers. I don't have them right in front of me, and we don't have enough time. But I will tell you that in terms of a process, we work very hard to make sure that the costs that we're passing on to the village through our budget process are fair. And I think that we do a very good job of that, although clearly there's some disappointment.
I'll ask a minor follow-up to that, because I know that that is a very complex question. But when you're looking at those charges, how do you determine which ones are actually being used by village residents versus town? And how do you kind of come to an understanding of what that percentage breakdown should be? Because that seems pretty complex, but maybe you can answer it somewhat quickly.
We'll try and answer it quickly, but it really is just an evaluation of the total service. And the portion, some of it is subjective in terms of what we think is being used by the village. So there's no hardcore, formula type of thing, but we do try and be fair. We do pass, we do have some overall costs that get attributed to both just the town residents and the village residents. But it's really, it really just amounts to a conversation with the town board every year about where we think we should end up and what's appropriate. So I can't give you a formula per se for every single decision that's made, other than to tell you that there is lots of discussion that happens regarding the budget and that issue.
Thank you. And just to make clear that those conversations are happening at public meetings, so if somebody wants to go and listen in and argue about how you're working out those percentages, they certainly can do that. One quick follow. Yeah. Okay, thank you. They're usually held at work session, not at regular meetings of the board, and at work sessions, you can listen, but you cannot ask questions. Okay, thank you. That's a good point. Certainly.
But at every board meeting, we always have a section for resident comments. So anyone is always welcome, as Michael has availed himself of on more than one occasion, to comment.
Okay, and the town supervisor, Jane Eny, reminded us all that at every board meeting, regular board meeting, there is a section open for public comments. And so if you've gone to a work session and you have questions to follow up with, you can ask it at that public meeting. And you can also, it's televised, so everyone can see it. And you can also email your administrator and your town supervisor with those questions, and I'm sure they're willing to provide you some information. And I think that's it. I think we're up to 9 o'clock. There you go. Very good. Thank you very much. And thank you to Kathleen and Meredith for coming today and preparing all their information.
Thank you. I want to also thank everyone for coming, and Lorraine and Meredith and Kathleen for a wonderful presentation. Have a wonderful summer, everyone. We hope to see